In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about conditional statements. Conditional statements are pieces of code that evaluate to either true or false, and depending on whether it's true or false, executes a block of code. An analogy for this is to imagine you're walking down the street and you see a fork in the road. And depending on the destination you want to get to, you either choose the left or right fork. Now, this is a good analogy for a conditional statement. The only difference is that you as the programmer not only get to architect the choices you make, but also the destination, which in this case is the code that gets executed. So let's take a look at our first conditional statement, which is called an if statement. An empty if statement looks like this. What this is saying is the following. If the condition in the parentheses is true, then execute the code in the block. So let's take a look at a real-world example. So here we have a variable called item that has the string skateboard assigned to it. And in the if statement, we're asking, is item assigned to the string skateboard? The answer to that happens to be true. Thus, if it is, we then execute the code in the block, which is an alert that outputs riding skateboard. We can also use a not equal to statement that checks if the item is not a skateboard, and if it isn't, to execute the code in the block. If you have a variable that is set to true, such as in this example, and you want to write an if conditional using it, you can do it like this. Notice there is no need to write item equals true, because asking if the condition in the parentheses is true is the default of the if statement. We can also add an else block to our if statement. So what this is saying is if the code in the parentheses is true, to execute the code in the first block. If the code in the if statement does not equate to true, then to execute the code in the else block. With if statements, in addition to having this if-else pattern, you can also use an if-else-if-else pattern. In this example, dog is a string assigned to pet, so the else-if branch of our conditional is true. If we change the pet variable to something that is neither a parrot or a dog, then the last branch will execute. Now that we've gone over the different varieties of if statements, the next type of conditional statement is the switch statement. Switch statements are useful if you catch yourself writing an if statement with a lot of if-else branches to it. So let's take a look at an example. In this code, we have a string called dog that gets assigned to a variable called pet. The switch statement then takes this variable and evaluates its value with the case statements. So if the variable pet is assigned to the string parrot, then this code will execute. If the variable is given a string of rabbit, then this code will execute. And finally, if the variable pet is given this value, then this code will execute. The switch statement is structured as follows. An expression is placed in the parentheses, then within a pair of curly braces, a series of case statements are added. And right below each one is the code to execute if the case statement is true. Each case statement is then added with a break statement. If you want, you can also add a default statement that executes if none of the other case statements evaluate to true. In the same way that a switch statement can be used in place of a very large if-else statement, a ternary operator can be used when if statements are extremely simple. So let's take a look at a ternary operation. The ternary operator is the question mark character, and the way that it works is as follows. You first start with a statement. In our example, our statement is that 10 is greater than 100. This is obviously false. We then have a question mark, which is the ternary operator. To the right of the ternary operator, we have two statements separated by a colon. If our ternary expression is true, then the code to the left of the colon executes. If the statement is false, then the code to the right of the colon executes. You can also assign a variable based on if a ternary condition is true or false. So here's an example of that. Here, 100 is listed as greater than 10. So the string yes gets assigned to the variable is it true. In this tutorial, we've gone over three main conditional statements: if, switch, and ternary. Until next time, bye-bye.